Welcome to the Virtually Speaking podcast. My name is Pete Flecha, and joining me as always is my good friend, Mr. John Nicholson. John, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's getting to be a little hot out there. I think I need to go spend some more time in the data center, on the cold aisle. So
Yeah, I do want to talk about that, but I think it's funny that we started the podcast and you were running out of your house with smoke alarms. So yeah, it is getting pretty hot. What's going on over there?
I was just so focused on this podcast. I was like, you know what? I'm just abandoning this site, initiating site failover, going to secondary house. So I'm in the process of moving. In fact, I'm not sure if there's just random art behind me that should be on a wall, but the rental house right now, I'm completely abandoning that colo facility. We're just initiating failover. So
Doing a
I'll figure it out after the podcast.
Nice, nice. I'm glad you've got some failover opportunities. Well, we're going to be talking a little bit of maintenance on databases. Databases have to fail over sometimes too. And launch just happened. We've just launched a whole bunch of content that's available on the VCF YouTube page, also on vspeaking.com. But lots of great content for VCF 9 that just came out. But one of the cool things is DSM, or Data Services Manager, is also available as an advanced service to VCF 9. And I wanted to dive a little deeper on what that means for folks that are already using it, but also what it looks like in VCF 9. And so joining us as our subject matter expert and old friend of the podcast, Mr. Cormac Hogan. Cormac, welcome back.
Thank you, guys.
Cormac, how you been? It's been a while since we've seen you.
I know, you don't call, you don't write. Doing good, man. Doing good. Spending an awful lot of time on Data Services Manager, as you're probably aware. So I'm looking forward to having a chat with you guys about what we have today and what's coming up with VCF9 and the DSM integration that we have there.
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, I knew you were coming on, and I went to check out your website, which I'm sure many folks do anyway, cormachogan.com. And that's where I noticed that you were recently at a London VMUG. So you were actually talking about Data Services Manager available in 5.2. And I thought it was funny that you guys were like, we're not going to say anything about what's coming. We don't want to lose our jobs. We want to make sure that, and so everything that you were saying was very 5.2 specific. Which I thought was funny.
Yeah, it's always been our kind of challenge, right? That behind the scenes we're working on the latest and greatest stuff, but then at the same time we're trying to, I suppose, evangelize what we have today or what's on the truck today, and getting that fine line between what's available today and what's coming. Yeah, always a challenge.
Yeah. No, I understand that. So I thought it might be good to at least start with, for folks that are not familiar with Data Services Manager, give us that initial pitch, like that sort of overview of exactly what is DSM.
So essentially, Data Services Manager is all about providing on-premises data services. We have a number of data services available since the DSM became first available to our customers, namely Postgres databases and MySQL databases. So what we wanted to do is allow a vSphere administrator to carve out a subset of their vSphere resources and dedicate those resources for data services. So this prevents like a data sprawl type situation occurring where you might get databases popping up all over the place or data services popping up in your vSphere infrastructure. It's basically giving those tools available to a VI admin, an infrastructure admin in this case, to set aside a set of resources and dedicate those resources for the purposes of data services. So at the same time as giving those kind of controls to a VI admin, we also wanted to, I suppose, the data admin, could be a DBA, but a data admin in the whole lifecycle management of databases on-prem as well. So we have a whole set of tooling around provisioning, around patching, around backup and restores, cloning of data services, databases. All of those kind of things are built into DSM as well. So whole host of features that may be very time consuming and maybe, really a draw on the time of a data admin or a DBA, where they should be adding value to the line of business. They're stuck doing what you might think of as being mundane tasks to do with databases and data services. And the last persona then is just the consumer. We want to make it very easy for a app developer, end user, whoever that persona is, to be able to consume these databases and data services very easily. And that could be through self-service, or it could also be through a ticketing-based system where that DBA provisions the database and hands off the connection string to the end user, or allow them to do self-service themselves, either through the DSM UI portal or through the DSM API that we have as well. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. It's trying to cater to those three personas and provide data services, databases on-prem for those three different personas. Sense.
It's interesting because some of these operations are things that, as a VM admin, infra admin, previously, it was always an interesting discussion with DBAs because it's like, well, okay, you're doing your own backups, I'm doing my own backups, or I backup VMs. Why do you've got this app granular or the operations. I have operational views. I can go look at the CPU utilization. And the database admins always wanted a separate set of tools, and they always wanted to do their own database level backups. They have their own operational level tools that are looking at much more granular things than I ever really wanted to look at. But it's interesting that we're creating those tools, at that lower level, or providing the visibility to those tools. Is there anything we're doing to kind of level set that vision across those, or make it easy to roll those up into common places?
So I think where you're coming from, John, is absolutely right. If you look at traditional, maybe Oracle DBAs, and even to some extent SQL Server DBAs, they would have built out their own set of tooling. But what's happening today is that there's a demand for open source databases and lots of different types of open source databases. So as I said, we've started with Postgres and MySQL. We've gone very deep on those, making sure that they're highly available and enterprise ready. And we have a vision to do additional open source databases going forward. But what we wanted to provide is the ability to manage all of these different open source databases in a similar manner, in a simple manner, but in an identical manner as well, rather than having these DBAs standing up stacks for each independent open source database, and then having to figure out, well, how do I back up Postgres? How do I back up MySQL? How do I do monitoring of these different databases? All of those kind of things. So you end up standing up these different stacks. We wanted to avoid that kind of siloing and give you a one-stop shop that it will allow you to do all of these different open source databases in a similar way.
Well, that's really interesting because that is something I do remember. If I had a Microsoft DBA and I had an Oracle environment, I'd be like, "Hey, can you go figure out backups? I think there's something called RMAN," and he would just like stare at me with the fires of a thousand suns. Like oftentimes these DBAs were super siloed to like a bizarre level of like it was easier to grab a random sysadmin and get them to go figure out how to back up SQL Server or vice versa than that. And it is interesting because I remember looking at Postgre versus MySQL. It's like, oh, they both do clustering, but in very slightly different and annoyingly slightly different ways, and trying to figure out how to operationalize that in a portable way. That does sound like that is a problem definitely worth solving.
Yeah, it seems like it reminds me of how storage. I always think about Ken Werneberg did a session once on, I forget the topic, but he started it with the simple statement of storage is hard. And it was a vSAN pitch about, it doesn't necessarily have to be that hard, and how we sort of made storage a whole lot simpler than it used to be with vSAN, and just having it integrated and having where a vSphere administrator could then potentially take on a lot of storage tasks, whether it's maintenance and all these different things and provision storage. Do you see any parallel like with the database management with DSM, or am I completely off?
No, I think it's quite accurate. And if we're perfectly honest, the skill sets that were involved in, like, for an Oracle DBA and even for SQL Server DBAs, those skill sets they're they're aging, right? And they're retiring. A lot of them are retiring, and there isn't the skill sets that's coming up to replace those folks. I think that's something that a lot of our customers have said to us, is that finding these Oracle DBAs, and actually DBAs in general, it's getting to be a challenge. So if we can make that simple and take care of many of those type of day two operations that a DBA would carry out. As I said, making sure that backups are working. We're able to monitor in a consistent fashion across all the different databases, which is what DSM is offering. All of those kind of things are going to help. Having said that, we also, and you touched on it there, Pete, we brought the vSphere administrators to becoming storage administrators through vSAN. We think there's possibility here that the VI admins could also become the data admins and be able to provision those databases. Now, we're not talking about getting into SQL query performance tuning or anything like that, but from the day-to-day operational aspect of provisioning databases and making sure that they're secure, compliant, consistent, they're meeting the security requirements of the line of business and so on. I think that's certainly within the realms of possibility with DSM here. And VI admin could actually take care of that for sure.
Yeah, but at the same time, not be the middleman, right? So I feel like it's one of those where while he can still do everything that he needs to do for governance and or she needs to do for maintenance, then also the app developers have the ability through their own tools to then maybe make their own backups or do whatever they're doing, but without having to like submit a ticket for a database to be provisioned.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and the self-service is part of that. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't. A lot of organizations still have the traditional ticketing-based approach where you have to open a ticket and someone provisions the database for you. But we can cater for both. We can cater for that ticket-based approach. We can cater for the self-service approach. So we can give end users access to this DSM portal. They can provision their own databases through a UI if necessary. But as I said at the outset, there's also a full-blown API that's available for developers if they want to provision databases through some kind of DevOpsy type approach or Git approach. Yeah, both are available.
And I don't want to bury the lead here, but I will say, like, you presented at the London VMUG, link below for those that are interested. Great session, by the way, and because it had like 3 or 4 really good demos that showed how simple it is, and it just really brought it to life for me. And there was a lot of good interaction with the audience, really good questions. But yeah, a really excellent deeper dive on DSM 5.2. But VCF 9's here, and I know while a lot of that information is still relevant, there's some changes. So maybe you can tell us what's new in VCF 9.
Yeah, so the big thing with VCF 9 is that we will have a release of DSM 9 to coincide with this. The main VCF 9 integration is around VCF automation and, of course, VCF operations as well. But the VCF automation aspect, of course, you're aware, and you may have done some podcasts on this already, is the bringing together of the ARIA automation and vCloud Director and trying to provide multi-tenancy and all of that kind of good stuff to our end users. So the integration that we're doing between VCF 9 and DSM 9 is around multi-tenancy predominantly, and how different organizations within the VCF automation can provision data services, gain access to data services, and all of that good stuff. So in a nutshell, what we'll be able to do with VCF 9, VCF automation, and DSM 9 is create an organization, and within that organization, there will be a concept called a data storage policy, data service policy, and that data service policy can define which tenants can access which resources on the VCF side, and then what data services they have the permissions to provision. So for example, I might decide that I have an organization of developers. They are looking to do things with Postgres. What I can decide to do is I can say for this organization, I am going to give them access to Postgres only, and I'm only going to give them access to maybe Postgres 15 because that is the only version of Postgres that my security team in my line of business have approved, and I can give them a backup location that they can consume as well. So it's all this sort of tiering of resources Again, the multi-tenancy part, maybe giving organizations access to the resources that they have paid me for example. But that's the integration aspect that we will have. Now, there is a second part to this, which is quite interesting. And of course, VCFA, or VCF automation, is now consuming the supervisor within VCF9. And so within the supervisor, we have these vSphere namespace constructs. So rather than me just carving out a set of resources on the vSphere side, now what I have the ability to do is create vSphere namespaces and use those vSphere namespaces as a landing uh, place for my data services. So for example, if I wanted to offer true database as a service, maybe a bit similar to RDS or something like that, as a provider, I might say, great, here's a namespace. I am going to build all of my databases on here. I'll just give the connection string to my tenants and I will just charge them accordingly. But now what I can do is set a particular SLA on that namespace, which is going to be really, really important because that's the namespace where I'm going to run all of my databases and data services.
So if I'm the namespaces obviously are a bit like DRS groups on steroids in terms of capability, but is that going to also automate creating VPCs or other network overlays or other things for that? So I'm thinking like before, if I had to stand up a database, once I had to stand up a composer database, which you've ever worked with Vue back in the day, you remember it was like a 10 megabyte database that, because of all the people involved in standing up a VM, getting network connections, getting firewalls approved, getting another database created hilariously for this 10 megabytes of, reasonably important data might take you a month. It sounds like I can just kind of like that whole process will just go through.
That is essentially it. It is just a click, click, finish approach. Obviously there's some setup involved. Like I said, those data services policies, they're going to be the driving factor to determine which organizations get access to which data services. But once those are configured, once a tenant logs into their organization, they will have a menu item to say data services or databases, whatever, and they can just click that and provision out based on the data service policy, the database of their choice, and based on what they've been given access to or granted permission to use. So it is as simple as that. It's I don't know if you've seen many of the other VCF automation aspects, like the building of VKS clusters, the building of virtual machines through VM service. There's even the volume services in there now for building storage as well. It's just another one of those items that is a part of what a tenant can get access to within an organization.
Yeah, and I see it's got
It's pretty cool.
It is very cool. I see it's also you've got the tech preview there for SQL Server, and I was thinking like, well, SQL Server is pretty enterprise grade like database, and I initially thought like is DSM do SQL environments need something like DSM? But then as you started to talk about some of that management of the multi-tenancy, I think it made a little bit more sense for me. But yeah, I guess that was probably one of the bigger things with DSM, right? In 9 is this tech preview of SQL Server.
Yeah, and this would be outside of VCF9. So the SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, is actually just part of DSM. And I do want to make that clear as well to the listeners, is that we don't rely on VCF9 to consume DSM9. You could have the previous versions of VCF5 and continue to use DSM and even DSM9. They will work together absolutely fine. It's just if you want the VCF automation aspect to work, that's when there's a dependency between VCF9 and DSM9. But if you have previous versions of VCF and you're interested in Microsoft SQL Server, absolutely, no problem. Go ahead and use DSM9 with your previous version of VCF if you're not quite ready to move to the VCF9 just yet.
Okay. And
but
I also heard if it's VCF9, or sorry, if it's DSM, you don't even need to be on VCF to try it, right? Like you can do it without VCF?
You could absolutely do that. Yeah. So there's no dependency on VCF, but you do need VCF licenses to be able to consume DSM. But for a proof of concept or just kicking the tires, you can just this plain old vSphere would work with DSM9, and you can provision your databases that way as well.
So I know recently Broadcom, they wrote this white paper on their big move. They made a massive move to VCF, the whole of Broadcom, which is a pretty impressive white paper, and I'll leave a link to the paper in the show notes of the podcast. But part of that was they discussed moving also all of their database services to DSM. So I was just wondering, did you have any part of that? Or are you aware of it, or what they're doing with DSM?
Yeah, I wasn't actually part of it, but I'm aware of it. They're one of our very first customers who started to use DSM in earnest. It's basically the personas we're dealing with here are our own VMware developers. And so anytime there's a request for a database that they need as part of their development cycle, they come to DSM and request that database. So this was a consolidation of lots of different database services that we had around VMware, and I think even Broadcom as well, including some RDS that we were using. So what we've done is we've consolidated all onto on-prem using DSM. And so now if any of our developers want a database, as part of their test cycle or development cycle, they'll just come to DSM and through an API call can provision a database. The whole thing is self-service and it's all managed by just a handful of IT staff. But they'll get their database, they'll consume it as necessary, and then they can just discard it again once their testing is complete. So yeah, it's a really interesting use case and one that resonates with a lot of our customers actually.
That's pretty awesome. Is it something that, like, just forgetting about Broadcom for a second, but like just in general, like if you're using DSM and you've got databases, I know in my experience with databases in time, sometimes they're not big enough and you need to scale, or you need to, or maybe it's temporary and you want to, scale down or something like that. Is that the type of stuff that happens automatically, like dynamically or live, or do you really have to take an outage for that?
Yeah, so we do have the ability to scale out these the databases for sure. Essentially, what we can do is provision single node databases, or for high availability, we can provision 3-node databases. And actually, to provide even more availability, we can, through the infrastructure policies I mentioned previously, provision these databases in a way that they're placed on different vSphere clusters. In fact, so with a 3-node, 3 VM database, we could put VMs on different vSphere clusters. And so if you lost a complete cluster, you still have your database available. Now that's the maximum number of nodes in the cluster, but what we also have the ability to do is scale up the resources that are available in those VMs for the database to consume. So there's a little bit of overhead in each of those virtual machines for the Kubernetes cluster that backs it, but the vast majority of the resources of that virtual machine are dedicated to the database. So we can scale up CPU, memory, we can scale out the disk that the data store is using, and even better, let's say it's a sort of Black Friday event. You would scale up maybe on the Thursday, allow the weekend to run through. Maybe your database is getting a hit a lot more than usual, but then come Monday, Tuesday, the following week, you have the ability to scale back down the amount of resources that are being consumed. So that's something that's certainly of interest for customers who do see these kind of ramping up of consumption. It could even be end of quarter, end of month, these kind of things where they're cycling the books or whatever the case may be. So we do have that capability as well.
Well, Cormac, that's a lot of great information. I appreciate you sharing the latest on DSM-9, which is apparently available now, even for folks that are on previous versions of DSM. You've been doing the Lord's work, as they say, as it comes to DSM over the years. And great videos out there. Great sessions that I've seen you present at the various VMUGs and stuff like that. So I'm going to leave links to all of the great content that you've been putting out there. But thanks for joining us again on Virtually Speaking, and I hope we can see you soon physically as opposed to virtually.
Yeah, it would be great. Thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.